Have you ever seen someone humiliated and then turn it around in a way that no one expected? Sometimes life surprises us in ways that even the most powerful cannot predict. And today, you will know a story that will touch your heart, arouse your indignation, and perhaps even draw some tears. A true, raw, and exciting story. The story of a poor, simple girl, forgotten by many, but who, in the face of arrogance and contempt, showed a strength and talent that no one could have imagined. Imagine being invited to a party, full of joy, music, and smiles, but not to celebrate, but to serve. Yes, our protagonist was invited not as a special guest, but as a helper, an orphan girl with few resources who carried the weight of exclusion on her back and, in her heart, a silent hope of being seen for who she really was. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt that because you didn't have the right clothes, the right last name, or the right status, you ended up being left aside? Well, stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover now may surprise you. During that luxurious party, where every detail was designed to shine, where each guest seemed to belong to a world of unattainable dreams, it was precisely there that an exciting twist took place. And no, it wasn't planned. It was not expected. Because talent, true light, cannot be bought. It cannot be pretended. It just explodes when you least expect it. That day, amidst looks of contempt and disguised giggles, the poor girl did something that no one could have imagined. Something that changed not only the course of the party, but her life forever. The arrogance of the rich girl, the mocking laughter of the guests, all this in a few minutes would turn into silence, shock, tears. Because humiliating someone can actually be the beginning of your own shame. Can you imagine what happened? Can you feel the tension in the air? That moment when everything suddenly changes? Well, I assure you, this story is not just about injustice. It's about overcoming, about courage, about showing the world that a person's value is not measured by the brand of clothes, nor by the money in the bank account, but for the light she carries within herself. If you believe that each person deserves to be valued for who they are and not for what they have, leave your like here on the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with those who need to hear it today. Let's spread this inspiring story to as many people as possible. And now, take a deep breath, because what happened next at this party was even more unexpected. She was a simple girl with a shy smile, but who carried in her heart a light that few could perceive. She didn't have the luxury of expensive clothes, the fashionable toys, or the popularity of other girls. She lived in a small house, a modest home, where the warmth of family was all she had. His parents were no longer there, leaving him the weight of an early loss, but also a legacy of unfulfilled dreams. Still, she did not let herself be discouraged. Within him, there was something much more valuable than any material treasure, a voice that, although it had never been heard by many, was capable of transforming the environment around him. Her talent was there, hidden. The poor girl had never risked singing to anyone, perhaps out of fear of judgment, perhaps because he did not believe that his voice could be heard in a world so full of other louder and more showy voices. But who would have thought that that simple talent, kept secret, would be the key to something so great? She believed that fate had already given Cher pain. So singing, she thought, would only be a distant dream. But fate had other plans for her. When the rich girl's party was announced at school, the idea of participating did not even cross the poor girl's mind. She knew she was not among the guests. After all, how could it be? She didn't wear designer clothes. She didn't have the kind of friends who were within that circle. So, when she was called, in fact, to work at the party, serving and helping, she didn't even think twice. It was an opportunity that might not be repeated, and despite knowing that she would not be treated as a guest of honor, she was. After all, who would refuse the chance to be, even if it was backstage, close to the whole party? She didn't care about that. She was used to being on the sidelines, without expectations, without big dreams of being noticed. What she wanted at that moment was simply to help, to be useful, and maybe even, deep down, to find some comfort in being there, even if it was just a maid. But life, as always, has a surprising way of taking us by surprise. And that's what happened. When she entered the house, she saw the grandeur of the event. People were dazzling. Laughter echoed everywhere, and the rich girl, with her party dress and lady of the party smile, seemed to be at the center of the world. The poor girl, on the other hand, hid in the kitchen and backstage, carrying out tasks without attracting attention. She knew her place, and she didn't complain about it. But even so, a small part of her wanted for a moment to be seen as something more, to be recognized not for her origin, but for the person she really was inside. As he moved from one side to the other, tidying up his things, something caught his attention. The sound of music coming from a nearby room. And there, in the middle of the party that was happening in style, she found her moment. Without thinking, without planning, she walked over to the microphone that was on a forgotten table in the corner. She knew it could be crazy, but something in her chest drove her. When she started singing, no one knew what to expect. She was just a girl in simple clothes, there to serve others. But the melody she released was not that of an ordinary girl. His voice filled the room like a soft and at the same time powerful wave. Each note seemed to touch the soul of those who listened. And at that moment, people stopped, turned to her. What was supposed to be a party for the guests turned into the great revelation of a talent that no one knew existed. The rich girl, who until then had been the center of attention, could not understand what was happening. She was used to being the star, to having all eyes on her. But now, those eyes were all turned to the simple girl, who had nothing, but who possessed something that no one else had. The true essence of music, of emotion. It was at that moment that the rich girl approached the girl. But what happened next was even more surprising. The poor girl, who until then had been invisible, now had the spotlight on her, and the rich girl, trying to get closer, found herself ignored. That turn of events was as simple as it was painful. The arrogance dissolved and was replaced by a look that mixed surprise and, perhaps, a little shame. But what really touched her was not the exchange of glances, nor the vanity of appearances. What became clear was that while one was concerned with status and image, the other, with her pure heart, was the real star. She didn't need luxury to shine, nor expensive clothes to be valuable. She was already extraordinary for being who she was. And life, in all its wisdom, made a point of showing this to all those present at that party. Now, can you see what really happened there? The real transformation happened when that girl, without ever having thought she could be more, allowed herself to shine. She wasn't seeking recognition. She just was who she really was. And that was enough to transform everything around her. Have you ever experienced something similar? A situation where the truth revealed itself in an unexpected way and changed everything? Tell us here in the comments. I really want to know your story. The poor girl, like most of us, had her dreams hidden in places that few people could see. She expected nothing from life but to survive, to move on, and, from time to time, to allow herself to dream of something bigger, grander. She knew that she could not change her life overnight, but somehow she believed that happiness could be achieved in the little things, in the simple gestures, in the moments of authenticity. That was what kept her going, what made her wake up every day with the hope that, perhaps, something good would happen. And that's when she heard about the rich girls' party. No one at school talked about anything else. It was the event of the year, the kind of party that everyone wanted to be in, the kind of party that the popular students bragged about being invited and others like her could only dream of. It was an event that seemed to be in another world, where glamour and luxury were so evident that it was difficult to imagine someone without the perfect clothes or the right friends. When the poor girl received the invitation, at first, she couldn't believe it. Is it for me? She thought, her eyes shining, though a part of her knew that deep down it wasn't. She knew she didn't have the pride of place there, nor the attributes that would make her seen as a guest of honor. Her simple outfit and her place in the world didn't allow her to even dream of it. But the invitation was there, like a cryptic note that seemed to offer a door to the other side, a possibility of something she would never have. But what happened next was a shock that made her realize something much bigger than she expected. She was not asked to be a guest. She was not called to dance, to smile, to be the center of attention. She was called to work, to serve. The invitation was not to be among the important, but among the invisible, those who were there to help, to serve others, like shadows that passed unnoticed. Disappointment stamped itself in his eyes. It was as if the weight of the world had fallen on her. She could have refused. She could have revolted. She could have said that she wouldn't go, that she deserved more, that the way they treated her wasn't fair. But deep down, she knew she had no choice. She was proud to be who she was. And even more, she had the strength to accept what life offered her without losing her dignity. Even if she was just a helper, she knew that there, in the midst of all that lavish party, she could find something more, something that, in the end, might be more valuable than any gala dress or any VIP invitation. She would discover that, often, true transformation does not come from a prominent place, but from where we least expect it. At that moment, she didn't allow herself to question why she wasn't seen, why she wasn't recognized like the others. She accepted, not with a yellow smile, not with a grudge, but with a silent understanding that sometimes the roles that life gives us are not the ones we want, but they are the ones we need. And on that day, she allowed herself to be where life placed her, without protesting, without resentment, without trying to change destiny. She had something inside her, something that not everyone saw, but that was about to reveal itself in a way that no one could have expected. And as she went about her chores and blended in without attracting attention, she knew it was just another step in her journey, another opportunity in disguise. Even there, serving others, she had something that others did not have. She didn't wear expensive clothes. She didn't have the material possessions that everyone valued so much, but her authenticity, her purity, and her unique ability to touch people genuinely were far more valuable. While everyone was worried about what they could show to others, she had something that no one could steal. Her essence. The initial sadness dissolved, giving way to a silent but deep force. And as the event went on, she felt within herself that her life, as difficult and invisible as it was to others, still had a purpose. She didn't need a party to feel important. She already had something that couldn't be bought with money, something that was about to bloom in unexpected ways, like a rare flower that grows in the middle of the desert. At that moment, she already knew that the invitation to be a helper did not define her. She knew that her journey was just beginning, and that the revelations that would follow would give new meaning to her life, her role in the world, and the way she saw herself. She was about to discover that, even though she was invisible to some, she had a power within her that not even great luxuries could compete with. Can you imagine how you would feel if you were in her shoes? Where did the disappointment of an invitation that seemed like an opportunity turn into something that pushed you to grow and discover yourself stronger? Tell me here in the comments how you would react if you were in her place. The girl entered a large mansion, feeling the weight of the discrepancy between herself and that world. Luxury was in every detail. The golden columns, the gigantic chandelier that reflected the light in an almost magical way, the tables filled with fine plates and crystal glasses, all shining as if they had come out of a fairy tale. The soft sound of a piano mingled with the lively conversation of the guests, who were perfectly dressed in clothes that seemed to have been tailor-made, and with elegance she only knew from magazines and movies. The decor was impeccable. Exotic flowers were scattered everywhere, arrangements that looked more like a set than a royal party. And there she was, with her simple dress and her hair arranged in an improvised way, trying to fit into that environment that was not hers. She was there to help, to serve. Like a silent shadow, she walked around the corners of the room, trying to be as discreet as possible without drawing attention to herself. Every step she took, she felt the gaze of others pass by her, as if it were invisible, as if she were nothing. Sadness was in the air, but she tried to keep it hidden. She tried to disguise the feeling that all that party was for a world where she would never belong. There was something so unfair about it, something that couldn't be ignored. Wealth and privilege were there, so clearly exposed that the difference between her and the others seemed almost painful. She knew that no matter how much she was there, no matter how much she was doing her best, she would never be more than an employee, an unimportant presence, someone the world wouldn't look twice at. Her eyes, though calm, carried a silent sadness, a wound that she knew no one would notice, not even the guests themselves who, with their smiles and empty conversations, barely noticed her presence. She felt it in every detail. When someone asked for something, she was there, ready to answer, but when she spoke, the voice was barely heard, as if the sound of her presence was not worth hearing. In those moments, his heart tightened, There was no space for her among those people. She was an invisible part of the party, an element that existed only to make sure that others were comfortable, satisfied, and that somehow made her feel smaller, like she was another piece in a game that wasn't meant for her, but for everyone else around her. With each smile exchanged between the guests, with each laugh shared, she felt more distant from the world she had always dreamed of. She looked at those happy faces and couldn't help but feel that there was something wrong with it. Something in all that luxury seemed empty, superficial. The conversations, the jokes, all that seemed to have a very high price, a price she couldn't afford. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about what was being served or the clothes people were wearing. It was about meaning. It was about the difference between having a grand party and having the dignity of being treated as an equal. While the others feasted on expensive food and drinks, she served it without anyone noticing her. And it hurt her more than she would like to admit. The pain came not from the fact that she could not be in her place, but from the feeling that she was nothing more than an accessory. That party, full of pomp and glamour, only served to highlight the abyss that separated her from what she most desired, to be seen as someone important, as someone who deserved to be there, not to serve, but to celebrate. She tried to hide the pain behind a discreet smile, doing her job without complaint. But something inside her wondered, why couldn't she be seen, treated with respect? Why did life have to be so unequal? These thoughts came and went in her mind as she continued to do what she had been assigned to do. But each time she passed by the guests, carrying another tray or delivering a drink, the contrast between her reality and theirs became even more evident. They had fun, they felt special, while she felt like a shadow, something that had no right to exist there, to occupy that space. Injustice was in every corner of the party, not just the difference between what she was and what others were, but for the simple fact that she knew that despite having so much to offer, her position in life was defined not by her essence, but by the place where she had been born, by circumstances she could not control. The brightness of the clothes and object around him only made the darkness of his own space brighter, a darkness that was not only physical but emotional, as if life itself had given him a secondary role in the great spectacle that was the world. But even against that backdrop of apparent inequality, there was something in his heart that refused to succumb, something in his mind that insisted on believing that somehow his story was far from ending there. Even at that moment, when she was no more than an invisible piece of support at a party that wasn't hers, there was something inside her that said that this reality couldn't last forever. Something was about to change. She felt it, and with each new task she received, with each new step she took, she allowed herself to dream a little bigger. She knew that luxury and wealth were not the key to true happiness, but something much deeper was beginning to grow within her. Her mindset, the way she saw the world, was changing, and she didn't know it yet, but it was about to transform her forever. And it is with this feeling of change that she continued at the party, serving, but with her heart prepared for something big, something that she still did not understand, but that she felt with all certainty that it was about to happen. Have you ever felt like this, as if you were in a place where you didn't fit, where the whole scenario around you seemed so far from your reality? Tell me in the comments what you feel when you reflect on this girl's journey, the pain of difference, and at the same time, the hope that is born when we least expect it. The girl was trying so hard to go unnoticed, not to attract attention, and continued doing her job without bothering anyone. But, as if fate had decided otherwise, the situation turned into a nightmare right before his eyes. That's when she heard the laughter, a loud laugh, shrill laughter, accompanied by a voice that had the power to make all eyes turn to her. Look, our helper has such a serious expression. Does she think she's at a party? She doesn't realize she doesn't belong here, does she? Said the rich girl, with a sly smile on her lips and her eyes shining with a mixture of amusement and contempt. Those words fell like a weight on the poor girl's chest, a direct blow that made her swallow hard. She, who already fell out of place, was now, without warning, reduced to an inferior being, exposed to everyone in a scenario of public derision. The rich girl's gaze swept across the room, and without hesitation she continued the exposition. I think she's trying to blend in, but not everyone gets a chance to shine, is it? Some people, no matter how hard they try, are always going to be just part of the scene. supporting actors, she said, and everyone around started laughing, as if it was the most normal thing in the world to ridicule someone like that. Those laughs echoed like a condemnation, as if they were sealing the girl's fate forever in an invisible prison of shame and humiliation. It was a public humiliation. Everyone was looking at her. There was no escaping that moment. She tried with all her might to control the tears that threatened to take over her eyes. No, she wouldn't cry there. Not in front of them. Not in front of so many people who looked on with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. She forced herself to hold her head high, but inside her, the revolt grew. How could anyone be so cruel? How could they treat another person like that, as if they were less, as if their humanity was something that could be thrown away, devalued by a funny joke? The pain did not come only from the mean comment. It wasn't just a feeling of being humiliated that burned in her chest. It was a feeling that no one there seemed to care, that her suffering was nothing more than a joke to be ignored, drowned out by laughter and lack of empathy. For a moment, she felt that the world around her was spinning nonstop, and she there was stagnant, unable to move, as if it were impossible to escape from his own reality. No one deserved to be treated like this. No person should have to go through this kind of situation, where instead of being seen as a human being, someone was reduced to a cheap joke. The frustration inside her exploded like a flame. She wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone that it was wrong, that no one ever should be disrespected in this way. She wanted to scream at that environment, at those fake smiles, at the people who were amused by the pain of others. How could they have fun at the expense of someone who was there, just trying to be useful, trying to do the best they could, without ever asking for anything in return? How could they be so cruel? But that was not how she saw herself at that moment. She couldn't afford to explode. He could not give in to the temptation to show himself fragile. And even with her heart tightened, with the feeling that the pain was suffocating her, she controlled herself. She looked down, took a deep breath, and continued to fulfill her role like a silent shadow. I tried to ignore the looks, the smiles disguised as compassion, the laughter that still echoed through the corners of the room. She tried to stay focused on what she needed to do, as if her pain was invisible, as if her soul had hidden itself so that she could continue living, without drawing attention to the anguish that consumed her inside. But the humiliation, like a mark, seemed etched on her skin. The feeling of inferiority was palpable. Every time she met someone's gaze, she felt a chill down her spine, a discomfort that only increased. No matter how hard she tried to hide behind a smile, inside she felt a constant struggle. It was as if he was fighting against a tide that wanted to swallow everything. A fight for dignity that was taken away from him in such a cruel way, without explanations, without reason. But she knew that it couldn't last. Something inside her began to revolt, to question every word, every laugh, every gesture of contempt that was imposed on her. She could no longer hide. She could no longer accept that life that did not respect her. The pain she felt would not be in vain. It was awakening to something greater, to something that she did not yet fully understand, but that, deep down, she knew she was about to discover. That party, that humiliation, those cruel words, would be the key to his transformation, because the pain wasn't going to destroy her. On the contrary, it would make her stronger. He would make her understand that, even when the world made her feel invisible, she had something unique inside her, a force that could not be erased. And that strength, something she still didn't fully understand, was about to reveal itself in a powerful, transformative way. It was a hidden truth of her journey, something she had not yet seen, but which was about to blossom. His mindset was beginning to change. She was starting to see what no one else saw. And as she stood firm, trying not to give in to the pain that crushed her, a new feeling began to emerge. Something much stronger, deeper, something that was about to change his life forever. And it is in this moment of pain, in this moment of public humiliation, that she began to get back on her feet. Not in the way everyone expected, not immediately, but with an inner strength that she still didn't understand, but that she was beginning to realize. Something that connected her to her true essence. Something that, somehow, she knew was about to be revealed, because her journey, like all of us, was just beginning. Transformation was already on the way. In the midst of all that tension, At the moment when it seemed that the humiliation could not be greater, something unexpected happened. The party, which until then had seemed immersed in a cold, distant energy, with forced laughter and superficial conversation, was interrupted by a voice that rose without warning, without any kind of preparation, but with a force that no one there could have foreseen. That was when one of the guests, a man who until then had only remained watching the scene with a glass of champagne in his hand, made an unusual gesture. He, with a smile that denoted a certain amusement, looked at the girl and, in a provocative tone, asked, "You're not going to sing for us, are you? I heard you have a wonderful voice, didn't you?" His words seemed to be just another tease, an attempt to make her feel even more inferior. But something in those eyes shining with anticipation made her, somehow, feel challenged. Those words did not hurt her as before. Instead, they began to ignite a flame of resistance within her, a spark that could transform everything. With a hesitant step, but a quiet determination taking over her posture, she approached the center of the room. He felt all eyes on her, the laughter diminishing, the whispers falling silent. But instead of shrinking even more, she took a deep breath and, with the shyness of someone who never allowed herself to be really seen, began to sing. On the first chord, no one moved. The sound of his voice, soft and at the same time full of unexpected depth, took over the environment like a wave. It was as if time had stopped. The laughter, the sneers, the jokes that were hidden in the corners, all this disappeared, as if absorbed by that melody. Her voice, a voice that few would imagine hearing in a place like that, spread throughout the space, filling every corner, every piece of that elegant room, as if it were a hidden revelation about to be discovered. Those notes, which started out timid, soon turned into an explosion of emotion. She sang with a feeling so true, so pure, that it seemed that all the pain, all the frustration she had swallowed during that night, was transmuted into it. Every word that came out of her mouth, every breath, seemed to carry with it the strength of everything she had experienced. It wasn't just a song. It was his soul expressing itself, his truth revealing itself in the form of sound. The hall, once filled with laughter and empty conversation, was now in absolute silence. No one dared to interrupt. People stopped talking. The glasses of drink were put down, and all you heard was that voice that seemed to fill the space in a magical way, as if it was the only thing that mattered at that moment. There was no longer any distinction between the guests. There was no one else up there and no one down there. Everyone was on the same level, all connected to that voice that seemed to take each one on an unexpected journey. She, without knowing it, was transforming the environment. It was transforming people's perception of her. She was no longer the helper. She was no longer the humble, invisible girl who was only there to do the dirty work. She was the star of the night. His voice, which many thought would be just a distraction, was now hypnotizing everyone. And for a moment, she no longer felt invisible. On the contrary, she was the only thing that existed in that room. It was as if the whole world had stopped to listen to her, to feel what she was feeling at that moment. The impact of his voice was so great that no one seemed to know how to react. The man who had made the comment, the one who had teased her, was now wide-eyed, as if he had been struck by a sudden revelation. The other people, who had previously been on the sidelines, now watched with mixtures of surprise, and even a little embarrassment. It was as if the song had revealed something they weren't ready to see. They weren't just listening to beautiful music. They were hearing the truth. They were listening to the courage of a person who, even in the midst of humiliation, had stood up to show the world his true worth. The girl, lost in her own melody, began to forget the environment, the looks that had previously bothered her. She was living that moment with an intensity that made her forget that, for a long time, she was only seen as a shadow, an unimportant presence. Now, she was the center of everything, not because of her appearance or social position, but because of her essence. Something inside her had changed, and those around her, even if belatedly, were beginning to realize it. And it was at that moment of pure magic, that she understood something profound. True transformation was not in the circumstances. It was not in what she wore or how much the people around her respected her. The real transformation was in what she carried inside her, in the strength, courage, and talent that made her unique. That party, with all its trappings and humiliations, had been just a setting, a stage where she finally allowed herself to shine. As his voice echoed throughout the room, a thought crossed his mind. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who felt invisible, who felt that their true essence would never be recognized. That song, that moment, was proof that, no matter how difficult the circumstances, there was always a space to stand out, to be seen, to be heard. And as the last note of the song floated in the air, she felt an inner peace she never imagined she could achieve. She had done something unthinkable. She had turned humiliation into power. She had turned the pain into her greatest strength. And in that moment, in that deep silence, she knew her journey was just beginning. Something inside her had changed. There was no turning back. She felt like a phoenix, ready to rise from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and now more visible than ever. The impact of that music reverberated in everyone present there. And as the last wave of silence dissipated, she felt deep in her heart that the game had changed. But she still didn't know the extent of the impact that night would have on her life. She didn't yet know that the biggest test was coming. When the sound of the last note still hung in the air, and the girl was immersed in a sense of quiet triumph, not really understanding the power of what she had just done, a click, an image was captured. That voice, still echoing in the hall, was not only heard, it was recorded, transformed into something that would transcend that party, would go beyond the limits of that environment so closed and elitist. The man who had challenged her ability to sing, perhaps out of curiosity or even wanted to laugh at her, didn't realize that this moment he had instigated was about to become something immense. In a quick gesture, he took out his cell phone and, without asking permission, recorded the performance. It was an impulsive reaction, almost automatic, but one that would have consequences beyond his comprehension. He just recorded that moment, a simple video, without imagining what it meant. When the video was posted, no one could have predicted that the girl's story was about to take an impossible turn to imagine. In the beginning, maybe it was just a joke for some, an attempt to laugh at the poor girl, the one who seemed to get lost in a world so far from her reality. But the impact was immediate, and what seemed to be a joke began to take on proportions that no one there had anticipated. The video, published in an unpretentious way, spread like fire in dry straw. Within hours, it had gone viral, with millions of views. It was impossible to stop. People were mesmerized by her voice, by her presence, by the authenticity that overflowed with each word sung. But what was most surprising was the effect this video had on society. The same society that, minutes before, was mocking her, was now applauding. That girl, who had been invisible to so many, was now at the center of a movement. His talent, his soul exposed to the world, became something that touched everyone in a visceral way. It was no longer just a song. It was a journey of a person who stood up against judgment, who turned a moment of humiliation into a display of personal power. She didn't know it yet, but her destiny was being redrawn at that moment. The video that was supposed to be a joke, something momentary, was now making the world bow to her. The words that had once been spoken to diminish her greatness were now used to exalt her. With the number of views skyrocketing came recognition. The girl that many considered insignificant was now shining in a way that no one could predict it. But the real transformation wasn't in the instant fame she was gaining. Of course, all eyes were on her now. Messages of support were starting to pile up, but the big change was in something much deeper. Her journey wasn't about momentary popularity. It wasn't about flashes of attention. It was about understanding that true strength comes from within, from the ability to stand up and show the world who you really are, without fear of being rejected, without fear that your truth will not be accepted. The hidden truth was there, in every chord, in every word she sang. It was as if she was finally allowing herself to be seen as a complete person, and no longer as a character limited by the stereotypes and expectations of others. The impact of that video was far greater than any superficial applause or acknowledgement. She wasn't just gaining people's attention. She was earning her own respect. As the video gained more and more views, there were interviews, invitations to programs, messages from people saying how her voice had touched them in an inexplicable way. She became the symbol of something bigger than herself. And it wasn't about fame, status, or momentary fame. It was about being the voice of all those who, like her, felt left out, despised, or invisible. Those visualizations weren't just numbers on a screen. They were people who, in some way, were witnessing something that touched the deepest part of the human soul. The video that changed everything was just the beginning of an even bigger journey. The girl, who found herself lost among these people seemingly so different from her, now knew what it really meant to be in the spotlight. But most of all, what really mattered was a message she conveyed. The world was beginning to understand that she was more than anything that had been said about her up to that point. She was unique, authentic, and what she had to offer went far beyond words and songs. She became a symbol of resistance, of overcoming, and the impact of this was, without a doubt, transformative. Gradually, she began to realize that something inside her had changed irreversibly. That humiliation of the party, the weight of those harsh words, all of that was dissipating, replaced by a new energy, an energy that could no longer be ignored. And as the world cheered, she knew that in that moment, she was just beginning to understand the true magnitude of her journey. But while her story had gained unexpected visibility, there was a hidden truth that she hadn't yet fully understood. She was now being watched steadily, not only by those who admired her, but also by those who were still ready to reject her, to minimize her value. The recognition she was receiving was not only positive. He brought with him a quiet pressure, an expectation that she was something that, perhaps, she wasn't ready to be yet. This was just the beginning, and her journey, more than ever, was about to unfold in ways that even she couldn't have imagined. The rich girl's reaction was almost predictable, but no less surprising. When the video went viral and the first compliments began to arrive, she, who had previously seemed to be the center of attention, now felt the weight of a reality she had never experienced. The spotlight, which had previously shone on her, began to turn to the poor girl. It was impossible to ignore the turnaround. She, who had been the villain, now found herself helpless, while the other, the real star, began to shine in a way she could never have imagined. In the following days, the rich girl watched attentively, with an expression that varied between envy and despair. She tried to understand what happened, but something seemed to be missing for her to understand the real reason for the poor girl's success. What she didn't understand, and perhaps never understood, was that the power of that performance wasn't just in the music. What had really enchanted everyone was the sincerity, the authenticity, and, above all, the transformation of a girl who had been able to rise from a public humiliation. But what happened next was, in a way, even more interesting. The rich girl, trying to regain some control of the situation, began to approach. She couldn't let the situation be completely dominated by the other. No, she needed to do something to regain the position she once occupied. Then, with a forced smile, she approached the poor girl, complimenting her voice, trying to create a connection, trying to be friends. The tone was sweet, almost syrupy, but there was something disguised there, something of interest, something that clearly didn't come from a genuine place. It was the attempt to recover what, somehow, she felt she had lost. What she didn't know, and probably wouldn't immediately understand, was that her words now carried a different weight. Something she had previously used as a form of power now became empty, disconnected from the reality of the other. The poor girl, now more confident, was not willing to fall into the old trap. She was no longer seeking approval. What she had achieved had not been a simple personal victory. It was a transformation, a turning point, a profound change that went beyond momentary fame. She knew that her worth was not tied to the opinions of the rich girl or anyone else. She was there in her own right. And, more importantly, she knew she didn't need the person who had humiliated her to move forward. And that's when the turning point happened. The rich girl, who once seemed to be the center of everyone's universe, was now ignored. The poor girl, with a serene smile, looked at her with a look of understanding, as if recognizing someone's weaknesses, but without feeling the need to repay her with the same poison. The real transformation was in silent contempt, in indifference that was not anger, but pure observation. Those who humiliated now reaped contempt. There was no revenge there, just an acknowledgement of the change of role. The impact of that attitude was more profound than the rich girl would have ever imagined. The poor girl's indifference was not just a response to her behavior. It was a revelation. It was a hidden truth that when you find your true strength, when you reconcile yourself to who you really are, the words of those who try to bring you down simply have no power left. The rich girl, who had never been challenged in this way, now faced the pain of silent rejection. The poor girl, who was previously seen as a nothing, now became someone with decision-making power, someone who could, without saying a word, change the game. And while this was happening, a sense of justice hung in the air. The rich girl, who had become accustomed to treating others as inferior, now found herself in the role of the one who needed to prove her worth. But most fascinating of all was that she was no longer the reference. The world around him was beginning to realize that true strength did not come from those who had the most money or status, but from those who possessed the courage, authenticity, and, most importantly, wisdom to get up after a fall. The poor girl, in her stillness, was doing something far more powerful than any manifestation of anger or resentment. She was demonstrating the quiet impact of true transformation. And this transformation was not limited to the stage where she sang, but spread to every aspect of her life. It didn't need external validation. He didn't need applause. Because, deep down, she knew that the greatest applause she could receive came from within herself. And that's how true justice began to be done. Not in words, not in public applause, but in those small actions of resistance that spoke louder than any superficial comment. The rich girl, although she still tried to get closer, no longer had the power to influence. Her attempt to regain some position failed in the face of the poor girl's silent grandeur. This was not a matter of revenge, but a cycle of change, where the real strength came from within, not from external circumstances. And as she looked at the rich girl, who now felt distant and irrelevant, the poor girl understood something much deeper. The words of contempt did not define who she was. Other people's judgment didn't have the power to dim his brightness. His true transformation lay in realizing that justice often comes in unexpected ways. She didn't have to do anything to make it happen. All she had to do was stay who she really was, not afraid to be who she came to be. Deep down, the change had taken place there, in his own mind and heart. And as the days passed, she knew that this journey was just beginning. The transformation that was happening before their eyes was no longer just a change in a person's life, but a reflection of what often happens in our own journeys. The poor girl, now recognized by the whole world, lived an almost magical experience, but at the same time was profoundly human. It was as if a key had been turned, not only in the scenario of her life, but in her own understanding of the power of authenticity. The repercussion of his enchanting voice did not take long to spread. The video, which initially seemed to be a simple moment of venting and expressing his soul, soon became a real revolution. In a few days, the girl who was previously seen with contempt and disdain began to receive a shower of invitations to sing in different places. From small events to large performances, she became the star everyone wanted to see. And the most interesting thing is that each invitation came loaded with respect, admiration. She no longer needed to prove herself to anyone. The recognition was genuine, because it came from those who knew how to see beyond appearances, from those who understood that true greatness does not lie in status or wealth, but in who you really are. But the opportunities did not stop there. The girl began to be noticed by schools and universities that wanted to see her shine in the academic scene as well. She received scholarships, not only for music courses, but also for areas that could further broaden her worldview. She was recognized not only as a talented singer, but as someone with an open mind, a broad vision, and a story capable of inspiring anyone. And at that moment, what was happening was more than a personal transformation. It was a clear message to everyone. When you are genuine, when you have the courage to show yourself as you really are, opportunities will appear. The world begins to see you, and more importantly, begins to recognize you. The poor girl, who once barely had anything to eat and felt limited by the circumstances in which she was born, now saw her life opening up in ways she had never imagined. Every step she took, she knew she was breaking barriers, overcoming not only poverty, but also people's expectations. With each recognition she received, she got closer to the realization of her dreams, and with each new opportunity, the truth became clearer. Being authentic, being who you really are, is what makes you win. And most fascinating of all, this triumph wasn't about making more money or achieving fame per se. It was about the true connection with your own essence and the transformation it generated in the people around you. But the impact of all this, in addition to changing his own life, began to reverberate in his community, in his family, in his friends. She, who had always been seen as someone inferior, now became a symbol of resistance and strength. Her journey was no longer just about her. It was about all those who were watching, hoping, and most of all, believing that real change can happen. She not only overcame prejudice, adversity, and scarcity. She won because she had the courage to be true to herself, not to bow to expectations, and to turn her pain into something that would ultimately be her greatest strength. And it didn't take long for the poor girl to begin to influence other young people who, like her, felt invisible to the world. They saw in it the reflection of their own dreams, their own struggles, and began to believe that, perhaps, for them it was also possible to achieve their goals. Because, deep down, her story was everyone's story. It was proof that, regardless of origin, status, or external limitations, when you find the courage to be who you really are, the world begins to align in a way that previously seemed impossible. The poor girl no longer cared about the judgments of others. She knew that what really mattered was the truth she carried within herself. From then on, the applause was no longer just for his voice. They were for her character, for her persistence, for the courage she had to stand up when the world gave her only reasons to fall. She knew that, deep down, the real victory lay in the small choices she had made along her journey. And these choices, simple and sincere, put her in the place where she was now. She was no longer the girl who hid behind her insecurities. She was no longer someone who felt inferior. She was someone who had discovered her true strength. And that strength now guided her. And it was with this feeling of renewed strength that she, with her natural humility, began to look to the future, no longer afraid of the unknown, but with the confidence of someone who knew that, no matter what challenges arose, she would be able to face them with courage and authenticity. Opportunities were no longer just a reflection of what she could do. They were a direct consequence of who she had become. And in doing so, she became the protagonist of her own story. A story that somehow touched all those who saw it, because she had understood something very profound. When you are true to yourself, when you believe in your potential and act on it, the impossible becomes possible. The world begins to look at you with different eyes, and you begin to see opportunities that were once right in front of your eyes, but that, out of fear or insecurity, you could not see. Now, it was time to take the next step. The world was about to find out more about who she really was, and the impact of her journey was just beginning to be felt by everyone around her. The moral of the story here, folks, is simpler than it seems, but it carries a deep truth. Never humiliate anyone. It seems like obvious advice, but in everyday life, how many times do we forget this? How many times do we let ourselves be carried away by vanity, by ego, by the idea that we are superior? What happened to the poor girl is proof that what we can ignore or belittle today can become tomorrow's greatest treasure. And it's not just about her story. It's about our own journey. What she experienced can happen anywhere, at any time. That person you look at and think you don't have much to offer, who seems to be aimless or voiceless, may be exactly the person who will one day shine and leave everyone around them speechless. Life takes turns, and what today seems to be a small defeat can be the seed of the greatest success. Now, imagine if the story was about you. How would you feel to see your life suddenly change? When you think about it, you see that the key to transformation is something simpler and, at the same time, more powerful than we thought. It is to be true to yourself. It is not to be carried away by the expectations of society that loves to label, classify, and even humiliate. Life is like that. It is unpredictable. But when we allow ourselves to be ourselves with all our authenticity and courage, things start to happen magically. And this story is not just about a turning point. It's about choices, about how a person, by deciding to be true and facing their own fears, can completely transform their reality. The poor girl not only overcame poverty or rejection, she overcame the mentality that many people still have about success, about recognition, and, above all, about true greatness. She wasn't looking for an external reward. She was just being herself, unafraid to show her essence. And that, in the end, was what made the difference. Therefore, when reflecting on everything that has happened, remember, never underestimate the power of authenticity. What makes us unique is exactly what makes us special. The one who today may seem to have nothing extraordinary may, in reality, be carrying a force as powerful as a star about to shine. Sometimes, all we need is an opportunity to show the world who we really are. And who knows, the next big name could be you. Life takes turns, and there is always a chance to start over, to shine. The difference is in the way we face the path. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own choices and how you see others, then it was worth it. Leave your like if this content made sense to you. Subscribe to the channel to continue following stories and reflections that can help you see life in a different way, and share this video with someone who needs hope, someone who is looking for a transformation. And in the comments, I want to know, have you ever seen a similar story happen? How do you deal with people who, at first glance, seem to be out of your league? Let's talk about it, because the exchange of ideas is what makes this journey even more enriching.